D1360 here with a very belated video on the Big 12 additions and the American response. I'll have a separate video out in 1 week covering the 6 schools that were added to the American. If you're new here, I go through slides rapid fire, otherwise you'd have a super long video. So if there's a slide where you really want to process the data, just pause the video. First, here's a TV ratings comparison. You can't really compare the 8 Big 12 schools to the 4 additions as they were all playing different competition. But within the 8 Big 12 schools and separately within the 4 additions, I try to make it as apples to apples as you could. So for the 8 Big 12 schools, these are Big 12 games only. No bowl games are included. No games against Texas or Oklahoma are included. And no ABC split windows are included. With Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF, these are games against American teams or BYU only. And with BYU, these are games against the American or Mountain West only, which puts BYU at a slight disadvantage, but I included the Mountain West because they're the closest league ratings-wise in comparison to the American. And if I did BYU games only against the American, I wouldn't have enough data. These ratings are the averages by channel from 2014 through 2020. In any instance where only one game would fit the criteria, I just removed it completely as that's not a large enough sample size. Not much difference ratings-wise between all the teams, but Oklahoma State has done really well in TV ratings. With their additions, the Big 12 has really improved its footprint, as Houston is in one of the biggest markets in the country, and Houston brings the #1 state for football recruiting, while UCF brings the #2 state for football recruiting, and Cincinnati brings the #5 state for football recruiting. Adding Houston and bringing the state of Florida and state of Ohio into the fold was critical, because outside of the Texas schools, none of the Big 12 schools were located in a top 18 state for football recruiting. Here are the academic ratings of the Big 12. Cincinnati and Houston are number 63 in Shanghai. UCF is number 90. BYU is number 53 in Forbes. Here are the institutional profiles. BYU has a $2 billion endowment. Cincinnati has a $1.5 billion endowment, along with 46,000 enrollment. Houston has a $1 billion endowment, along with 47,000 enrollment, and UCF has a 72,000 enrollment. Here are the revenues, depending on whether you use USA Today, which doesn't include private schools, or the Department of Education's Equity and Athletics. And here are the athletic budgets. In blue are the USA Today numbers, and in black are the Department of Education numbers. And the graph on the right takes the Department of Education's numbers, and in light blue is their football budget, in dark blue is their men's basketball budget, and in orange is everything else, and altogether that's their total athletic budget. Here is what I call the self-generated revenue of all 12 schools. The numbers are taken from the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. In the graph on the right, the light blue is ticket sales, the dark blue is donor contributions, and orange is sponsorships and licensing, which all together combine to make up self-generated revenue. Here's an attendance comparison. BYU will be at the top of the Big 12 along with Iowa State. UCF brings strong football attendance, and Cincinnati brings strong basketball attendance, and I'm sure their football attendance is only getting better and better now. Here are the NCAA tournament credits each school has earned from their conference from 2013 through 2021. In 2021, the value of an NCAA tournament credit was $2 million, which would be divided up between 6 seasons for $337,000 each. Cincinnati and Houston will make a lot of money for the Big 12 through NCAA tournament credits. And here are the KenPom conference rankings, an average since 2014. The Big 12 remains the #1 basketball conference with these additions, even after losing Texas and Oklahoma. And in football, here's the average Massey composite through the past 3 seasons. The Big 12, with their new additions, has finished ahead of the Pac-12 2 of the past 3 years, and ahead of the ACC all of the past 3 years. So if you use on-field performance and on-court performance as your barometer for what's a Power 5 conference, the Big 12 is clearly a Power 5. The new Big 12 will have a school that's won a national championship in BYU, and the other 11 schools who have contended for the national championship or a college football playoff spot within the past 15 years. BYU brings a ton to the Big 12, including good TV ratings, a national fan base, very good football and basketball attendance. Cincinnati brings a good market as well as the state of Ohio. They were successful in the Big East. They've had 3 top 10 teams since 2009, assuming this year's team will be a top 10 team. 8 top 25 football teams since 2007, and a basketball program with a ton of history. It's the 12th winningest program of all time. Their football and basketball stadiums were recently renovated. Houston brings the number 5 market in the country and a 4 school in the number 1 state for football recruiting. Their men's basketball budget is already within Big 12 range. They're coming off a Final Four appearance. They've been to 6 Final Fours, top 15 all time. They opened a new football stadium in 2014 and renovated their basketball stadium in 2018. And both football and basketball have finished top 10 since 2015. UCF brings the number 17 DMA with minimal competition in their market, as well as the number 2 state for football recruiting, a 42,000 full-time undergraduate enrollment, a 72,000 overall enrollment. They have the highest self-generated revenue among the American entrants. Their football stadium opened in 2007. They average 44,000 football attendance. They've had 3 top 10 teams since 2013 and 2 New Year's Six Bowl victories. That's it for the Big 12 portion. Now on to the American portion. For context of this video, reports are UAB, Charlotte Rice, North Texas, UTSA, and Florida Atlantic are headed to the American. This presentation was made before then. I planned to film it this week, but the news broke before I got to it. So the rest of this video is what the American expansion portion of this video would have been if the news had broken before I got to it. My assumptions when looking at candidates would be no Mountain West teams, no Army plus A10 combos, no Liberty, no UMass, and no FCS call-ups. So I had 17 schools that I'd look at that were being thrown around. I eliminated Texas State as they were only 50 miles away from UTSA, and UTSA would be chosen of the two. And same story with FIU. So the first thing I did was look at athletic budgets, and I was looking for schools whose budgets were not compatible with the American. So right away, I eliminated NIU, whose athletic budget is at least 14% lower than all MAC schools. I eliminated Louisiana Tech, who had Conference USA's lowest athletic budget, and their athletic budget was actually at least 22% lower than all Conference USA schools except Southern Miss. And the double whammy is that they're located in the 219th MSA, whereas every non-East Carolina American football member is in a top 55 MSA. And Southern Miss had a bottom 5 athletic budget of all Conference USA MAC Sunbelt football schools, which was at least 16% lower than all Conference USA schools except Louisiana Tech. And the double whammy is that Southern Miss is located in the 248th MSA, whereas every non-East Carolina American football member is in a top 55 MSA. So that left me with 14 theoretical candidates. Like with the Big 12, the first thing I did was try to look at TV ratings, and my goal was good apples-to-apples data. So I removed any conference championship games that would inflate a team's ratings, as well as any bowl games. So I made it games against Conference USA, MAC, or Sunbelt teams only. I ran into a bunch of problems. For one, several ESPNU games were not rated, and CBS Sports Network data is not released publicly. So this left me with very little data, good data that I could use. And so my conclusion was to not draw any conclusions off the TV ratings because there wasn't enough good data, and the teams are all probably somewhat interchangeable. Another thing I looked at, not sure how much it matters, is how many times each team was able to get a Power 5 team to agree to play in their stadium against them. Obviously, this wasn't much of a factor, as Old Dominion was not added to the American despite having 9 times where a Power 5 team would come into their stadium, a lot of turkeys. And UAB was added to the American despite not getting any Power 5 teams to come play them at Legion Field or Protective Stadium. Here's a demographic comparison. All of the theoretical candidates were ranked in a top 50 MSA, with the exceptions of Coastal Carolina, Louisiana, Marshall, Western Kentucky, and Appalachian State. Interesting to note that of the 6 schools that were added to the American, they were in the number 4, number 5, number 8, number 23, number 24, and number 50 MSAs. 3 of them were in the number 1 state for football recruiting, Texas. FAU was in the number 2 football recruiting state, Florida. UAB was in the number 7 state for football recruiting, Alabama. And Charlotte was in the number 8 state for football recruiting, North Carolina. And then here's the MSAs along with the major competition within their market. One thing that pops out is that UTSA is in a top 25 MSA with little competition within their market. So this leaves UTSA with the opportunity to gain a relatively large market share. Here's an academic comparison. Obviously, Rice is a world-class university. UAB has strong academics, and all 6 editions are Carnegie R1 or R2, or in Rice's case, AAU. Here's a comparison of the institutional profiles. Rice has a monster $6.5 billion endowment. UAB has a solid $540 million endowment. FAU and Charlotte are at 30,000 enrollment. UTSA is 35,000 enrollment, and North Texas is over 40,000 enrollment. Here's a revenue comparison using both sources, USA Today and the Department of Education. USA Today doesn't have the private schools listed. And then using USA Today, here's how much of those revenues were from student fees, school funds, and were non-allocated. FAU had the highest non-allocated revenue of the candidates. And here's those numbers in graph form. The light blue is student fees, the dark blue is school funds, and the orange is non-allocated revenue. And the graph goes in order from the highest non-allocated revenue to the lowest non-allocated revenue. Here's the self-generated revenue of the candidates per the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. I didn't want to use the USA Today numbers because they do something different with sponsorship and licensing. The two schools with the highest self-generated revenue, Old Dominion and Appalachian State, did not get in. But FAU, UTSA, Charlotte, and UAB were all in the upper half. And here it is in graph form, going from the highest self-generated revenue to the lowest self-generated revenue. The light blue is ticket sales, the dark blue is donor contributions, and the orange is sponsorships and licensing. And combined, they make up self-generated revenue. Here are the athletic budgets. On the left are the USA Today numbers, and on the right are the Department of Education Equity and Athletics numbers. Old Dominion had the highest athletic budget among the candidates, and they did not get in. Rice, North Texas, and UAB were up there. Here are the numbers in graph form. It goes from highest to lowest according to the Department of Education. Of course, the USA Today doesn't have numbers on Rice because they're a private school. These are the football budgets. All 6 schools that got in had a football budget over $10 million. Rice had the highest football budget. These are the theoretical candidates' football budgets in graph form. For men's basketball budgets, UAB and Charlotte were on top and they got in. UAB, Charlotte, Old Dominion had high men's basketball budgets, while Coastal Carolina and App State were a bit on the low end, as well as FAU and UTSA. Here's a 3-year attendance average for football and men's basketball. The 6 schools who got into the American were number 2, number 4, number 6, number 7, number 11, and number 13 of these 14 schools in combined football and men's basketball attendance. Here's the 5-year performance. In football, it's using the average Massey composite, and for basketball, it's using the average KenPom. On the field and on the court, performance was obviously very little of a factor, as Appalachian State had a higher football Massey composite over the past 5 years than anyone in the American, and they did not get in. While UTSA, Charlotte, and Rice were all in the bottom 4, and they all got in. Here's a look over the past 25 years of the number of times football has finished in the top 25 and basketball has made the NCAA tournament. If you combine those two numbers, North Texas, UTSA, FAU, and Rice were the bottom 4, and they got in. So again, on the field and on the court performance made very little difference in the selection process. Finally, here's a one-sheeter comparing all the candidates. There was little room to write the abbreviation, so there's a key to the right. The first column, TIX, is for ticket sales. The second column, DON, is for donor contributions. The SPO column is for sponsors and licensing. The SGR column is for self-generated revenue. The REV column is for the hire of revenues between USA Today and Department of Education sources. The NAR column is non-allocated revenue, which means no student fees, no school funds per USA Today. The ABU column is the athletic budget hire between USA Today and Department of Education. FBU column is their football budget per the Department of Education. BBU is their men's basketball budget per the Department of Education. The attendance column is their 3-year combined football plus men's basketball attendance. The MAC column is their 5-year Massey composite ranking for football. The KP column is their 5-year men's basketball ranking for KenPom. The 25/TA column is their number of top 25 finishes in football, plus their number of NCAA tournaments in men's basketball over the past 25 years. The FBST column is the football recruiting rank of their home state. The MSA column is their MSA ranking, plus the level of market competition. So if they had a lot of competition in their market, it would have an H for high. If they had a modest level of market competition, it would have an M for medium. And if there was little competition within their market, it would have an L for low. The academic column is the highest ranking between US News or Forbes or Shanghai. The research column is whether they're AAU, Carnegie R1, Carnegie R2, or not ranked at all. And the final two columns are enrollment and endowment. Truthfully, this was ultimately an exercise in futility because only two columns on this sheet mattered, and they were the FB state column, the football recruiting rank of their home state, and the MSA column. Of the six schools who were added, North Texas, Rice, and UTSA were in the number one state for football recruiting. FAU was in the number two state for football recruiting. UAB was in the number 7 state for football recruiting, and Charlotte was in the number 8 state for football recruiting. And for MSAs, North Texas was in the number 4 MSA, Rice was in the number 5 MSA, FAU was in the number 8 MSA, Charlotte was in the number 23 MSA, UTSA was in the number 24 MSA, and UAB was in the number 50 MSA. The final part of this video will be a rundown of my predictions for how university presidents would rank these 14 candidates before the news broke of who was getting added to the American. At number 14, I had Western Kentucky as they were in the number 241 MSA, whereas everyone in the American, except ECU for football members, were in a top 55 MSA. And Western Kentucky is in the number 28 state for football recruiting, when all football members of the American are in top 20 states. Number 13, I had Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina had some negatives in terms of their academic rankings, their enrollment, their endowment, and their non-allocated revenue. Number 12, I had Louisiana. There's some good things about Louisiana, like they have low market competition. They're the number 6 state for football recruiting. They had the lowest student fees among the candidates, and they had good athletic and football budgets. But what it came down to for me was that ultimately, by adding Louisiana, the American would be doubling down in the number 25 state in terms of population when it already has a member in the state's population center, New Orleans. I thought that would be a non-starter. It's one thing to double down in massive states like Texas or Florida or bigger states like North Carolina, but I didn't think they'd do so in a mid-sized state like Louisiana. Number 11, I had Appalachian State. They had really good attendance and non-allocated revenue and self-generated revenue and football success over the past 5 years, but ultimately they're located in a micro-statistical area. They're not nationally ranked by US News or Shanghai. They don't have a Carnegie research classification. Their endowment and budgets are a little low, and airport proximity. Number 10, I had Buffalo. They're in a top 50 MSA, AAU school, flagship, top 100 school academically, pretty large endowment. They've had good football recently and very good basketball. But ultimately, I just thought that there would be no appetite from schools located in Tulsa, Dallas, New Orleans, Memphis, Tampa, and North Carolina to expand in Buffalo, as Western New York is not only far out of the footprint, it's also not a big pipeline for football recruiting. And Buffalo was bottom 2 among the candidates in non-allocated revenue and football budget. Number 9, which I turned out way wrong on, was FAU. My thinking was that South Florida views UCF as their peer, so why would they want to elevate FAU to their league? When they don't want to be viewed as a peer of FAU, their goal is to be a peer of UCF. And I also thought men's basketball would be a factor in American expansion, which it wasn't. But FAU brings to the American the number 8 market, the number 2 state for football recruiting, the ranked number 153 in Shanghai. They had the highest non-allocated revenue among candidates. Their football budget was already within league range, and they had a top 3 self-generated revenue among candidates. Number 8, another one I was wrong on, was North Texas. There's a lot of positives with North Texas, the number 4 market, another school in the number 1 state for football recruiting, number 111 in Shanghai, Carnegie R1, 40,000 enrollment, top 3-4 athletic budget among the candidates. Ultimately, I was pretty shocked to see North Texas included due to market duplication. And also, I thought there would be no way in heck that SMU would want to elevate North Texas, a school within the same market. I could see SMU agreeing to UTSA or Rice, as they're in San Antonio and Houston, but I was completely blindsided that SMU allowed North Texas into the league. Number 7, I had Old Dominion. They're in the number 37 MSA, which is one of the largest MSAs in the country without a major league franchise in the Big 4 sports or a Power 5 school. Old Dominion just rebuilt their football stadium in 2019. They had the second highest non-allocated revenue among candidates, along with the highest self-generated revenue, the highest athletic budget, and the highest men's basketball attendance. Unfortunately, Old Dominion is an FBS bottom feeder at the worst time possible You can get away with bad football if you're located in Texas or Florida, but can you get away with bad football if you're located outside of Texas or Florida? Number 6, I had Georgia State. Atlanta is one of the most crucial markets in college football, arguably the most critical. Top 10 MSA, as well as the number 4 state for football recruiting. Georgia State would fit the footprint well without duplicating markets while adding a big state to the footprint. Georgia State is a good research school and they have 50,000 enrollment. Working against them was the lowest self-generated revenue among candidates and the lowest football budget. Number 5, I had UTSA. I think the Americans saw a big opportunity for them to get a good size of their market, as UTSA is in a top 25 MSA with little market competition. There's no NFL team. Number 4, I really thought Marshall would be the one non-market school who would get in. They're the only show in town. They have a long history of support. They have a long track record of being good in football. They're second highest ticket sales among the candidates. And they were really up high among the candidates in both football attendance and men's basketball attendance, which I thought a good all-around candidate like Marshall would appeal to the American. Number 3, I had Charlotte, who's in a top 25 MSA, while the big ACC brands are 2+ hours away. Number 2, I had Rice. They're in the number 5 MSA. They're the crown jewel academically within the G5. Rice boasted a top 3 athletic budget among the candidates and the highest football budget. They haven't had a top 25 finish in football or qualified for an NCAA tournament in men's basketball since 1970. They could be the worst program in your league for football and men's basketball and still be a valuable member because of everything else that they bring to the league off the court and off the field. And finally, at number 1, I had UAB. They're in a top 50 MSA with low market competition. They would bring the number 7 state for football recruiting. They're a good school academically. High endowment, a football budget already within league range. They had the highest men's basketball budget among the candidates. They just opened a $175 million football stadium, and their basketball stadium underwent a $123 million renovation. The only negatives are their football track record pre-Bill Clark, and football being dropped for 2 years due to University of Alabama politics, when the completely rational and level-headed Paul Bear Bryant Jr. tried to avenge Gene Bartow, who is long dead. So in conclusion, my predictions were that UAB, Rice, Charlotte, and Marshall would be added to the American. I did not foresee the American adding 6 schools. I thought they would add 4, but if they went to 6, I would have picked UTSA and Georgia State. Obviously, Marshall and Georgia State were wrong, as FAU and North Texas were added instead.